Through brute force and subterfuge, Mercedes have managed to convince the FIA to step in and address their concerns about porpoising. While Mercedes might be happy they got what they wanted, many teams on the grid are upset that the changes happened at all, and that it has happened so late. Whether they like it or not though, the changes are here to stay, and the grid needs to act fast, because the 2023 season is closer than it seems. We all know that Mercedes have wanted these changes all season, but do they actually help the Silver Arrows? Or have they shot themselves in the foot? The FIA have finally approved changes to the underfloor configuration in order to reduce the reliance on low ride heights for improved performance. In addition to raising the floor edges by 15mm, more stringent floor flexibility tests are being implemented, as is raising the diffuser throat. Since the Canadian Grand Prix, it's been clear that change was coming, but it's probably taken longer than most teams would have liked. The FIA originally tried to force through changes to help reduce porpoising by fitting extra stays to the edges of the floor to improve floor rigidity. Flexing floor edges have been discussed as one of the various triggers of the aerodynamic oscillations, but no one apart from Mercedes was on board with that change. That then developed into the FIA measuring how much cars are bouncing and punishing teams if they're endangering their drivers' health with their car setup. That change comes in Belgium, and for 2023 there will be new, fancier sensors fitted to the cars which will help the FIA be more accurate in their monitoring of oscillations. Christian Horner has been particularly against this change, insisting that the FIA should not have control over how teams set up their cars. And it's tricky for the FIA, because where do you draw the line? While there is a safety obligation of the FIA to look into, where does that line stop? Do we need to seek permission to go from slicks to wet or wet to slicks, if we hit a curb or not? You've got to be very careful about the unintended consequences of these things. He is a bit dramatic with this response in our opinion, and from what we've seen so far, Red Bull won't have to worry about the FIA intervening in their setup because they haven't been bouncing. But Mercedes have. This is the first part of the rule change that might backfire at Mercedes big time. The closer a ground effect car gets to the ground, the more downforce it produces. That's just a fact. But Mercedes cars seem to be especially sensitive to any movement away from the track surface. Earlier in the season, multiple Mercedes team members spoke about how once they got their car running low enough, in the metaphorical good place window, they would gain loads of lap time. Their theory seemed to be that at a certain ride height, the amount of downforce they produced would suddenly increase dramatically. But if they're more prone to bouncing and the new FIA tests come in Belgium say they're bouncing too much, then Mercedes may be in trouble. Toto Wolff even spoke about a medical report he was shown in a meeting with Ben Sulayem at the Hungaroring that highlighted just how bad the Mercedes bouncing was. The FIA has commissioned medical work on the porpoising. The summary of the doctors is that the frequency of 1 to 2 Hz sustained over a few minutes can lead to brain damage. We have 6 to 7 Hz over several hours. There is no way that that level of bouncing is going to be legal in Belgium, and if Mercedes can't get it under control and give Lewis Hamilton and George Russell a car that won't cause them brain damage, then the FIA are going to tell them to raise their ride height, and they will lose a huge amount of downforce. No matter what way you spin it, that doesn't sound good for Mercedes in a competitive sense. Just before we carry on, what is your opinion on Toto Wolff admitting that his team are putting George and Lewis at risk of brain damage? Do you think that should be a bigger issue? Obviously, F1 is a dangerous sport, but the drivers are in control of the risk when they step into the car. This is a risk that is more out of their control than the risk of spinning out of a corner for going too fast, for example, or the risk of colliding with another car during an overtake. Is it morally right to put drivers at risk of something that they have very little control over? We would love to read your opinions on that below. Anyway, back to how the FIA rules have backfired on Mercedes. As if potentially being punished for having a car that's prone to bouncing wasn't already bad enough, Mercedes may be in trouble with how the technical regulations for car design are changing next season. The lifting of floor edges by 15mm may seem small, but in the world of advanced aerodynamics that F1 exists in, it is potentially huge. The low pressure under the car, which generates downforce, will always increase the more effectively the floor edges are sealed. The better the floor edges are sealed, the less likely air is to travel under the floor or out of the floor in a way that you don't want it to. With this change, how the teams seal the floor will have to change. They'll have to move their floor edge concept more toward vortex generation in order to achieve the best results. If you've taken a look at the different teams' floor edges this season, The Red Bulls have always been the most complex and developed. Even earlier in the season, when everyone else was running with floor edges that were basically straight lines, the RB18 had undulations and cuts that created vortices along the floor edge. Red Bull have been ahead of the game on this all season, while Mercedes have been playing catch-up. Just as the Silver Arrows have started to settle their car and get their concept working, they're going to have to change it again. If their aerodynamics team has been doing their job and watching how the rest of the grid has developed through the season, then they should be okay. If they start 2023 how they did 2022 though, and fail to adapt and innovate quickly, it wouldn't be surprising to see them bouncing around for the first half of the season again. So that is two potential stumbling points for Mercedes within the rule changes that they've been trying to force through. There is a third issue though that isn't quite so obvious, but may be more damaging in the long term. George Russell joining the Mercedes team was a big change in dynamic for them. Since 2017, Lewis Hamilton has been the main man. Nico Rosberg left the team after beating Hamilton in 2016 and was replaced with Valtteri Bottas, who, despite his many strengths as a driver, wasn't up to the same level as Lewis and Nico. Very quickly, Bottas became Mercedes' number 2 driver and helped Lewis win everything on offer for 4 years. George Russell is not the same person as Valtteri Bottas was by the end of his stint at the Silver Arrows though. Bottas had been beaten into submission, forged into the handle of a Lewis Hamilton-shaped sword and wielded by Toto Wolff. George though is young, feisty and very eager to prove that he can mix it with the best. He isn't going to let himself be made into Lewis Hamilton's number 2. He is at Mercedes to be their new number 1. Whether that happens by Lewis retiring or by proving that he is just a better driver than him, he doesn't care, but he fully intends to do it. So far, he has proven that he's definitely on the same level as Lewis is this season. I'm sure we can all agree that Lewis has been below his normal Mercedes era standards this year. Don't get angry in the comments, I'm not saying George is better than Lewis has been in the past. But looking at just this season, he currently sits 12 points above Hamilton in the World Drivers' Championship, and he would be higher if he hadn't been for him getting out of the car to help Zhou Guanyu in Silverstone. He has outqualified Hamilton 7 times to 6. He's beaten him in both sprint races so far, and in races he's finished, his average position is 3.83. Lewis's average position is 5.08. The two have been united for most of the season by the problems with the car. Their battle has been with the W13 and making it into a Formula 1 car, not a pneumatic drill. They have also been at war with the FIA to get regulations changed. Those changes are now here, so who will they be at war with instead? Alpine Chief Technical Officer Pat Fry gives the opinion that it might be each other, and we find it hard to disagree. Speaking about how the Mercedes drivers' focus will change from the cars to the results, he said, "When the objectives become races and championships, I'll be able to tell you whether the respect I see today between the two will prove to be a predominant factor. When playing for the highest stakes, I think it's natural to have some tension, but if people fundamentally respect and esteem each other, then it will never go too far." Do you think Lewis is going to be happy about a driver 13 years younger than him coming in and trying to prove he's the next big thing? I don't think he will. In Lewis's mind, he's the top dog at Mercedes. It's his team, not Toto's team or Mercedes' team. And that is the third problem for Mercedes from the new regulations. Their garage has appeared to be a place of harmonious collaboration so far this season, but now that the two are fighting for podiums at every race, is that really going to continue? If I was in their position, I'd be thinking it's time to start looking out for number 1, myself. Do you think Mercedes campaigning for rule changes is going to hurt them or help them? And who do you think is going to come out on top this season between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton? Let us know what you think in the comments, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.